Welcome, everyone. Please turn off your cell phones and beepers and anything else that might squeak in the day. The ceremony will now begin with our children. Elijah Weissman, Astrid Reed Kennedy, Sophia Deborah and Anna Grieder, Oliver and Hannah Dowling in their full glory. And now, Karine Vigel will process in with the class of 2010. The first two rows, so if there's no please allow the graduates to sit in the first two rows. Thank you. Imagine John Lennon. Okay, we're all seated. Good day, all. I am Charlotte Ulett, International Executive Director of the Celebrant Foundation and Institute, a nonprofit educational organization and members of the International Federation of Celebrants. I ask our founder, Gail Sarma, my colleague, Director of Academics, Cynthia Reed, Dory Bless, member of our Board of Trustees, and our bedazzling faculty and alumni that are present to please stand up and remain standing. Okay, that's great. I just want to see who's here. Okay, with joy unleashed, we welcome everyone to our 2010 Celebrant Graduation Celebration. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup to Celebrant Karine Vigel of France, who was chosen by her teachers to bring in her 2010 Celebrant graduating classmates. Please take a stand. Yes. You're elected by everyone. Thank you. And everybody be seated. We're thrilled and honored to have everyone here as we gather on this spot from near and far. We are especially grateful to supportive friends and family that join us on this day in May on the shores of our continent's Big River, known originally as, by First Nation people, Muhek-Antuk. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Muhek-Antuk. Great. Which means river that flows simultaneously, north and south. That's not easy to do. Not too many rivers do that. But if the rivers didn't do that, things wouldn't have come up and down this great river. And that's why we have all of this now. Our family of life cycle celebrants are Zoyinats, life explorers. Each precious ceremony celebrants consciously curate with and for clients brings life to life. Ceremony binds people's wills and induces spiritus mundi, a unanimous heart. Shaped by all, so says author Lewis Hyde in his masterpiece work, The Gift, how the creative spirit transforms the world. And that's what life cycle celebrants do. Through and through, life is our launching pad. On this lovely day, we look out the window when the screens come up, and we'll see the shores of where, not too long ago, people from all walks of life arrived, worked, slaved, birthed, loved, suffered, danced, fought, died, and brought forth and transformed new generations. That's how we all came to be here today. It's the story and the truth we share, no matter what or where our origins are. Graduates, as certified life cycle celebrants from Celebrant Foundation and Institute, you will now be a part of our international family of celebrants that pays attention and dignifies life's milestones. Being a celebrant is something very special. Our attentiveness gives people the opportunity via ceremony to have their own stories be told, to have the wherewithal to voice their declarations to their community, to bring in intention as they move through their profound life experiences, and to have their love be shared authentically, in their words and in their way. Through rites of passage ceremonies, we live out and express the quintessential interdependence that we have with each other and all living things in this precious ecology of life. Know that your celebrant practice and identity are historic and essential. This is socially relevant work, and each of you are human rites of passage activists, big time. I said this last year, and I'm going to say it again. And as I stand before you, looking into your glowing faces, and I want to get your faces in my mind right now and look into your eyes. So I'm going around. I'm looking at your eyes. You're looking at me, okay? Know that your ancestors right now are dreaming of you. Yep. Graduates, your future is important to us. So as you cross the threshold, you will be joining a vibrant and generation celebrant family that loves you and will continue to support you and listen to you. Updated facts. Worldwide, there are over 6,000 celebrants. Whew, we'd have to get a bigger room. Your Celebrant Foundation family covers a lot of territory. Now counting our class of 2010, there are nearly 450 celebrants in 39 states, in 5 Canadian provinces, as well as Mexico, Northern Ireland, Spain, and France from our organization. Yeah. Okay? And I want to let you know that we grow slowly on purpose, so that every year there's a class about 100, and that you guys kind of marinate, and that we can work with you. Yeah. I like to cook. Okay. And our celebrants preside, listen to this one, over 3,000 ceremonies a year. Yep. Graduates, our entire international celebrant community sends you their best wishes as you become certified life cycle celebrants on the shores of your own mighty Muhaantak River called life. Welcome it with open arms, and we welcome all of you. With great pleasure, I introduce our keynote speaker today, Mr. Stephen Kiesling, Editor-in-Chief of the award-winning publication, many awards actually, Spirituality and Health. For many of our celebrants throughout the years, Spirituality and Health magazine has been the golden door that brought them to the Celebrant Foundation and Institute. We are forever grateful to Stephen and his great staff at Spirituality and Health magazine. They enlighten our world. This magazine tells stories that need to be told and brings like-minded and hearted people together. The current issue, which we have yesterday and today, is a gift to you from Spirituality and Health. Stephen, we have prepared your story chair, so to speak, and so come on up and join us. Thank you.
Hey. Liberation. I am, truly, actually, I'm an oarsman and a rowing coach, and I see the world as an oarsman and a rowing coach. And one of my practices, especially when I get around water, is to try and really look at the water and think about the water and watch the waves and get my crews to actually look at the water and feel into it and think about it. So just take a moment to think about this river that we're standing kind of above or sitting above. Just feel into that and feel the joy of that river. I mean, it's actually cleaned up a lot. I rode around it once years ago. It was a 28-mile race. And we rode down the Hudson bailing every 200 meters or so. And that was 20 years ago. It's cleaned up a lot. It's a beautiful place. And this is a beautiful place. A good reason to be happy, to think about all the hard work and the good times and the bad times that have brought you people here to this great celebration of being celebrants. And I also confess I have reason to be terrified standing here. First time I was a speaker at a wedding, this was in the Berkshires, and one of my rowing buddies was getting married, and he had rented out his whole beautiful camp, and there were maybe 30 oarsmen there as part of the wedding, and he had ordered more lobster than all 30 oarsmen could eat, which is amazing. It was enough food to have gotten Napoleon out of Russia. And it was this beautiful day, and at that time I was right off. I was 21. I was right off the Olympic team. I had a bestseller-selling book out there, and I was feeling on the top of the world, except that I'm a writer and an oarsman, and I was asked to give this talk. So I wrote this thing, and I started reading it on this beautiful hilltop in the Berkshires. I was reading away, and I was really nervous, and I was stumbling and stuttering, and I was dying up there. And at one point, the bride's dog came up, front and center. And it turned out what had happened is the dog had gotten in and eaten all the rest of the lobster. So, I was up there giving my talk, dying, and I looked at the dog and I thought, I wonder what the dog thinks of this. And right that moment, the dog threw up. And I mean, this was like a scale model of the Berkshires coming out of this dog. And there's, what do you do? And I resolved, I was never going to get involved in speaking at a wedding after that. In fact, I didn't want to speak to anybody after that. And then fast forward quite some time, I was actually asked to be a celebrant in a wedding in San Francisco, and I was really excited. And anyway, at the time, I was trying to lure my sweetheart, Mary Bemis, who was the editor of Organic Spa magazine. Anyway, she lived across this river, and I was trying to get her to come to my river in Oregon. I live on the Rogue River in a beautiful spot, big rapid, but I live in a single wide. I mean, it's kind of so I'm trying to say, hey, move from your beautiful place on the river to my single wide on the Rogue River, and I was getting there. But then I mentioned that what I was going to. She said, "What are you doing this weekend?" I said, "Well, I'm going to San Francisco to marry an old girlfriend." Click. Anyway, recovered from that. Mary moved out 5 months ago, so things are good. But in being a celebrant at this wedding, I mean, it was really a marvelous time. I got to share I had two of my favorite characters in this speech. One of them were sea squirts. I don't know if you guys know about sea squirts, but meditators should really meditate on sea squirts, because what they do, it's a great little creature. It swims around in the ocean, and then at some point it attaches itself to a rock, and it digests its brain and becomes a plant. I tell that to my friends in India. The other thing is, my other favorite character is Clint Eastwood, and actually, it turned out to be a very successful line. In one of Clint's movies, he said, when you kill a man, you take from him all he has and all he'll ever have. And you think, which gets a reaction in a wedding, but you think about, especially in a ring ceremony. But really, I mean, if you think about it, in a ring as a symbol of eternity, a ring is a symbol of sharing everything you have and everything you'll ever have. And even the mother of the bride, who was a Jehovah's Witness, was really pleased, because there was no mention of God in the ceremony, but she figured these people were really married. So, anyway. But I would now like to try something, to invite you into a ritual. This is my ritual. I've never done this before, but we'll see if it works. It's a ritual that goes back 2,500 years, give or take. And all of the seats have to be filled for this to work. So if somebody could come forward, and you can't have at least up front, you can't have any spare seats, so this just doesn't work. So this ritual actually goes back to the classic, to Greece in Athens in the classical period. In fact, it's the reason there was a classical period in Greece. And what the Athenians had figured out was that by integrating the legs into rowing, sitting on a sliding seat, you got your whole body into the thing, and that meant you could row in circles around the Persian fleet, which were just rowing with their arms and their back. And so the vastly outnumbered Athenians clobbered the Persians in the Battle of Salamis, and that's why we're not speaking Persian, or fewer of us are speaking Persian now. So this tradition came after it was forgotten for a long time. Everybody went to rowing with just their arms and their back, and then at the beginning of intercollegiate sports, and there was the Oxford-Cambridge race, which was the second intercollegiate sport after cricket. That was 1820s. The first American intercollegiate sport was rowing, in the Harvard-Yale race, 1852. And it was in the 1870s, the Yale crew, which is my crew, figured out that, oh my gosh, we've got to get the legs back into that. And so what they did was they started taking oatmeal from the dining hall and putting it on these planks so they could lubricate the planks and slide on them, and they clobbered Harvard with this innovation. And it makes sense if you've tasted Yale's oatmeal. But anyway, so we'll move now from there to I followed my sister into rowing at Yale, and that's sort of changing traditions. So let's all the front row. Okay, you're going to be you're the stroke oars, right? The next row is 7, and the next row is 6. Okay, strokes are port oars, so that means your left oar is your left hand is going to be farther out, so and your right hand is not so far and I want you to lean forward to the catch. Okay, now and the seats behind you, you're doing the opposite. Okay, so if you're in the second row, your right hand is forward and your left hand is a little bit back because your oar is going to go out that way and the ports are that way and then down the line. Okay, everybody, put your hands out. Come on, we can do this. Okay, so we're going to start. Just try rowing this thing. Okay, so. Okay, start. We'll sit ready, and you'll follow the stroke. Attention, row. Just row back and forth. You can do this. I don't know. I've never tried this before, but you look fabulous. Okay. Now, yeah. Actually, this looks like my freshman. This is good. This is good. And if we had more time, we could probably get all to the varsity, but. But now I want you to come up to the position. Okay, this is the racing start. Okay, now we're at the Olympics. Okay, this is years of training. This is really serious. Okay, and I want you to look to your right and left. Okay, and just look at each other. And what you're looking at is you're looking at the East Germans, the Russians, the Brits, the French, whoever. Okay, your competition. Okay. All right. So you're looking at this thing. Okay. Now you're sitting at the start. You've been training for a long time to get here. Okay. Now here's the rub. This is 1980, and an arrogant superpower has rolled into Afghanistan, and you're going to sit there for the next 28 years. Okay? Feel into that for a second. And then feel into whatever it is in your life. Whatever that experience was for you. And I'm sure if you are here, you have 1, 2, or 3 of these. Maybe more, I don't know. Those moments where you really break open and the world isn't what you thought. And then, in my case, I was a Yale Scholar of the House in philosophy, so I wrote a book about this. And the last line of it, I think as a result of that, was, the Olympian stands alone. And I was 21. I thought I was really smart. And it took me 28 years to go back to the Olympic trials in 2008. And was up, in this race. And realized something, there's something different happens. Before every race, and I want you guys to try this, okay? Now get back like you're about to start the race, okay? And now, imagine there are 8 people, or however many people. What I want you to do is the front row, just reach back and grab the hand of the person behind you, and that middle person reach back with your other hand and grab the person, and just link up down the boat, okay? And this is, so you're just like that, okay? Just so you're linked up. Okay, and what you realize, and there we were, my partner and I were looking at, it was U.S. Training Center A, U.S. Training Center B, U.S. Training Center C, U.S. Training Center D. Yep. And then we were Ashland Rowing Club. Okay. This is good. Okay. And anyway, the point of all this is, this is the point of rowing, is this moment And this idea that the Olympian stands alone or rowing stands alone, what happens if you're alone in a boat? You go around in circles. You're only as good as your teammates. And actually, you're only as good as your competition allows you to be, makes you. I mean, you're looking at the East Germans. I mean, if you're looking at the East Germans, they're looking at, this is striving together. And that's what it's all about. But at the same time, what we have, you can all relax now, but what we have in a larger sense right now, you're looking at the big picture of our world right now, is we have a lot of people rowing around in circles feeling alone. And I'll give a really brief history of why that might be true. And it starts with my mentor, a man named T. George Harris. T. George Harris was born, he's now 86 years old. He was born on a small farm in Kentucky, tobacco farm, literally walking behind a mule. He had polio and rickets, and when he was born, actually, as he was going through this, his mother made a pact with God saying that if he lived, he would do great things in the world. And he grew up with that. So he was going to become a preacher. But then World War II came along, and he started out as a conscientious objector. But that didn't, he realized that wasn't going to work. So he went off to the war to fight Germans. And he was very good at it. He was a forward artillery scout. He was commissioned at the Battle of the Bulge. And he helped liberate a Holocaust camp. And he saw just the worst that human beings can do to each other. And having seen that, he came home and said, well, that is the worst. What is the best? And so he took the GI Bill, went to Yale, and became a reporter for Time. And he was covered the front lines of the civil rights movement. And then in the late 60s, he went on to start a magazine called Psychology Today. And that was the sort of the beginning, covering the human potential movement, putting people like Abraham Maslow on the map. And just telling people, hey, you can become what you want. And this was a magazine that reached millions and millions of people. I met him in 1980. After I graduated, he read my manuscript and offered me a job at a new magazine called American Health. And that was the beginning of the fitness revolution, when suddenly people were realizing that, you can be 70 years old and start running a marathon or a triathlon or whatever. And then in the 90s, there was this incredible shift where we realized that neurons can regenerate at any age. And so it's not just our bodies that are our muscles that we can bring back, but there's our brains. And in the last 10 years, the world has gotten even stranger, where it seems that what we think of ourselves, our sense of selves, is something we're creating in real time, all the time. And we're co-creating with each other, with our environment, with what we eat, what we drink. So this in one lifetime, we've gone from a guy on a farm behind a mule, where his life had been defined, by the farm, by his religion, whatever, to a world where right now feels like everybody is making themselves up in real time, all the time. And of course, that means if you're on the forefront of this, as I suspect we are, have every reason to be confused and feel lost. I mean, what is this self I'm creating? And one of the things that was really interesting and just strange bit of research that just popped up in this is that losing your eyesight as you age is not a symptom of dementia, it's a cause. Let's think about that. People one of the reasons people become demented, or Alzheimer's, things like that, may be that they lose their eyesight. So it's basically losing contact with the outside world. We start losing ourselves. Interesting. So what do we do with that? And I go back, one last story, but maybe 10 years ago, I was, was going through a divorce, and I was living in Ashland, Oregon. It was a time of, leaving my kids and all that. And I happened to be, my other passion is kayaking, whitewater kayaking. And so I was going down the Rogue River, and there's a place where there used to be a dam, and the dam is right above a falls that's called Powerhouse or Tillamook Falls. Anyway, it's a Class 4 rapid. It's pretty scary. And as I was paddling toward this thing, I was by myself, and it was one of those moments where I was kind of ready to do it, which is really stupid. I mean, really stupid. But we get into places where it's like, what the heck? Let's go do this. But I didn't. And instead, I stopped and, instead of going over the thing, I started paddling around on the top of this, above the dam, and looking over. And then I went over to the side of the river. And I pulled out, and I stood on this little grassy spot looking out over these rapids. And that spot was just the most beautiful place in the whole world. And it happened to be for sale. It had been for sale for 6 years. And the reason it had been for sale for 6 years is that the ground had been ripped up by miners, and it was covered with 10 feet of blackberries. I mean, it was, from with my little spot on the river, I'm standing by the edge of the river, it was beautiful, but behind me was just a mess. But suddenly I realized I'd found my spot, so I ended up buying this place. And over years of going out on weekends, going out and cutting blackberries, and then finally bringing in heavy equipment to knock down get rid of the mining stuff, and it gradually transformed it into this beautiful place by the river. And then at one point, some neighbors moved in, and there was a young woman who was 30 years old who had cancer, and she would sit in this spot and watch the river, and she ended up dying, and now there's a little memorial to her there. Which none of this kind of came together for quite some time until I met a guy who. A storyteller, a Native American storyteller, and he was looking for this thing called the story chair, which was the centerpiece of a salmon ceremony that dates back thousands of years. And anyway, he was convinced that this story chair was somewhere close to this spot. And so I started researching and decided he was completely full of it, and it was wrong, it was upriver. And anyway, he had been looking for 20 years. And well, one day, Grandma Agnes Baker Pilgrim came to visit, and she's well known because she's on this. There are 13 indigenous grandmothers who go around the planet doing really cool things, and she's 85 years old. She gave up her cane a few years ago because it was getting in the way. It's kind of that sort of person. Anyway, she came by, so. She's sitting in my single wide and with this storyteller, and he had brought these field notes from the Smithsonian. And in these field notes, written in 1933, when a linguist was going up and down the state of Oregon and Washington, sort of collecting native stories. Anyway, he was collecting these stories and writing these things down, and he had described the story chair. A guy named George Baker had come down from the reservation. The Indians were all, they were kicked out in the 1850s. There was a major village right where I lived, and anyway, they were all sent up north to a couple of different reservations, and one of them came down to tell the story. So anyway, Tom is reading this account of George Baker describing this chair, and it's so big and so wide, and it's in this part of the river, and how do you get there? And I was sure it was a half mile upstream. Anyway, at the end of this, Agnes Baker Pilgrim said, "George Baker is my dad, and I have a picture of him sitting on a rock at home." So she goes home and brings back this photograph that was taken in 1933 by this linguist who got this stuff into the Smithsonian. And so with this photograph, we suddenly realized that we had taken a picture of Agnes Baker Pilgrim sort of at this little bluff overlooking the rapids, right in front of the chair. I mean, there it was. Anyway, I walked out in January of about 3 years ago and found this thing. It took about 15 minutes. And 6 months later, had 500 Native Americans camped out in the backyard. And the amazing thing, what happened was the falls, the reason they're great for kayaking is that they also stop the fish. So this ceremony developed where they would catch the first salmon of the spring run, and which meant that there were people coming from downstream tracking the fish. And the Native Americans ate like a pound of fish a day, a pound of salmon. I mean, it was how they survived through the winter. So this was a big deal. So they would track the fish up the river, and at these choke points in the river where it would be possible for somebody to catch them all and starve everybody upstream, they would have rituals. And the ritual was you catch the first salmon, and then the time it would take for that fish to dry, you wouldn't catch any more. And so that would allow fish to go upstream. And then they would, at the end of it, they would divide that fish among all the people, and people came for 100 miles to this place to do this ceremony. And then they'd all eat a little bit of this fish, and then they'd take the skin and the bones of this salmon, and the deal was they would dive into the falls. So, and basically you're supposed to return it to the bottom of the river at the base of the falls. So, anyway, we decided to do this and renew the ceremony. And so there were all these people, and Grandma Aggie was there, and she actually had to bring in salmon from someplace else because there just aren't enough salmon in the river right now. But we did the whole thing. We had a sweat lodge by the river, and there ended up 3 of us who decided we were going to, return the bones and skin to the bottom of the falls. And I mean, this is pretty nuts, because there's about 2,000 CFS, cubic feet per second, coming through this, and so you're diving into this thing, and I mean, the only reason we're diving in is because supposedly they've been doing this for thousands of years. But nobody's done it since 1856 or whenever. So, anyway, not being a complete idiot, I made sure that the real Native Americans went first. And it was pretty amazing. This young man, about 20 years old, who went, and the story chair is right. You have to climb out over this channel that's really moving fast, and you climb up, and there's this. The story chair is essentially the chair where you sit, where the fish jump into your net. It's a pretty cool place. And then you go up above that, and we figure, well, that's where you dive in. But we didn't want to do it because that would dishonor the thing. We weren't going to practice. So anyway, this guy goes and he bows to the chair, but the way these things work out, actually, the local search and rescue team, the fire department, was there doing a training run, and they have a class every year at this place. So anyway, they were there, and so we had the Native Americans, and then we had all these fire department divers just ready to save us from all this. And anyway, I'm going on too long with this, but it was this kind of magical thing of actually mostly watching this other guy dive, and another two guys, and then diving into this really scary pool, and holding the skin and bones of this salmon that were wrapped in cedar boughs, and the goal was to get to the bottom. And anyway, the water's really aerated, so you dive in, and it was like champagne, but it was also really deep. And I dove in, and I was going down, and I was like, wow, this is cool. And then, wow, this is scary. And I didn't make it to the bottom. I don't know if anybody did, but anyway, I let it go and came back up. How did I get into this?